Good afternoon, Jamaica. Welcome to Consular Conversations Live. It's Wednesday, March 22nd. I am taking over as host for Mario, who you may have remembered. My name is Veronica. I'm a Foreign Service Officer who has been living here in Kingston for about 15 months. And today I'm joined by Consul General Stephen Black, who will be answering questions about visas and giving you general consular updates. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Veronica, and hello to all our listeners out there in Jamaica and in Visa Land.
All right, so just a reminder, you are welcome to share this stream with your followers on all of our streaming platforms. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at US Embassy JA. Again, that's at US Embassy JA. So before we get started, please note that we cannot and will not answer specific questions about your individual case on this public platform. You're entitled to privacy on your own situation, and we don't have access to detailed information during the program. So, Stephen, do you have any general updates? What's going on in the consular world here in the embassy?
Well, yes, I do, Veronica, and thanks for asking. So what a difference a year makes. As your listeners will probably recall, a year ago, we were looking at tourist visa wait times in excess of 800 days. And I'm happy to say, and I'm sure that the listeners are aware of the fact that those wait times have dropped dramatically. And that's because we've been able to transition out of the pandemic, ramp up our operations significantly to the degree that now we've been able to drive down those wait times. Right now, we're in the middle of our J1 summer work travel season, as well as our season for H2 temporary workers. These are visa classes that enable people to travel to the United States to work on a temporary basis for a variety of employers, either benefiting through cultural exchange from that process or simply benefiting from an employment relationship where they're working for a significant period of time in the United States. So those numbers are ramping up. As a matter of fact, we will be processing thousands of those cases, J1 summer work travel and H2 visa cases, over the next several months. And as we accommodate that level of demand, naturally, we're not going to be able to process as many tourist visa cases as we were doing before, but we're still processing a significant number. But just a word to your listeners, if you are looking to apply for a tourist visa, our suggestion is apply well in advance of your date of travel. This way you have enough time to land that appointment and then ultimately get your visa. The other thing I'd like listeners to know on the tourist visa front is that, as they know, we have another process by which we adjudicate tourist visa cases, and that's through the interview waiver process, where applicants are not required to come in at all. They merely send in their passports at our prompting for processing, and they don't have to show up at the embassy. It's a very convenient process, and it saves a lot of time because people don't have to wait for an actual appointment. Well, again, as we're processing more and more J1 and H2 visa cases, there is going to be some delays in processing interview waiver cases. So we just want people to know that up front, that there could be delays in that. But please be patient. We're working as hard as we can to process your cases. And on the other front, the immigrant visa front, we've made a lot of progress over the past year as well. We had huge backlogs a year ago, and we still do have a sizable backlog, in all honesty. But we have been processing in excess of 1,000 cases a month. This month, we're processing close to 1,900 immigrant visa cases. So I know a lot of people out there have been waiting for immigrant visa appointments for literally for years, and they're asking, hey, when am I going to get an appointment? When am I going to have my opportunity to get a visa? And all I can say to those people is please be patient. We are processing cases. Your number may not have been called yet, but at the rate of processing 1,000 a month, it's only a matter of time before you'll be able to schedule an appointment. In the meantime, there are people who have a need for an earlier appointment, and there is a process by which they can request an expedited appointment. That's for an immigrant visa. Please understand that if you do need an expedited appointment, you need to direct your request to the National Visa Center. not to the U.S. Embassy. It's the National Visa Center that's responsible for scheduling all immigrant visa appointments. And so they are the point of contact for submitting that request. And if they respond positively and approve, please do not contact the U.S. Embassy to ask about scheduling the appointment. Someone will reach out to you to make those arrangements. But if you reach out to us by email, we're getting hundreds of requests for expedited scheduling or expedited appointments. And the more time we spend writing back and telling people that that's not the appropriate method for doing so, it detracts from the time that we can devote to processing cases and actually making sure that people who ask for expedites get them. And the other point for people who are applying for immigrant visas is very important. I know that when you work with the National Visa Center, you send them copies of documents, but please understand, when you come to the embassy, you will be expected to provide documents as well, and particularly original documents. We will need to see original documents such as birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, etc. It is so important you bring those documents with you so that we can actually process your case to conclusion during your first and what we hope will be your only interview at the embassy. Because what we really are ultimately looking to do is process your case as quickly as possible. But the immigrant visa process requires or has documentary requirements, and those requirements must be met. It is a legal requirement before we can actually issue a visa. So it is so important that you come prepared with the documents that are needed so that we can actually make a decision.
Thank you. And Stephen, speaking of expedites, because you just covered immigrant visas,
Yes.
I have a question from Marie Campbell. She says, "Good day, I have applied for a visitor visa to attend my daughter's graduation in May, but the date I got is in July. How can I get an earlier date?" So my question to you is, under what kinds of circumstances do we approve expedites for non-immigrant or visitor visas, and how do I apply for that kind of process?
That's a very good question. So the criteria for an expedited tourist visa appointment is typically compelling humanitarian reasons or circumstances. So for example, if someone's a family member has died, a direct family member such as a parent or a spouse or a child, that is sufficiently compelling to justify approving an expedited appointment. And we typically approve those. The other circumstance that's particularly noteworthy is if people are traveling for some type of life-saving surgery. So you had a heart attack and you need a quadruple bypass surgery that you can't get here locally. That's another circumstance in which we would typically approve an emergency appointment. And in any of these cases, we need you to document that in your request. Now, the way to request it is you do so via the same mechanism that you schedule a regular appointment. You go to the appointment scheduling website, and you will schedule an appointment taking whatever appointment you're offered, even if it's a year out. It really shouldn't be because our wait times are much shorter than that. But you take that first appointment, and after you lock in that appointment, you'll then be offered the opportunity to request an expedited appointment. And that's the point at which you will provide an explanation as to why you need the appointment, and you'll submit that request electronically. Once that's done, a consular manager will review the request, determine whether it meets our criteria for an earlier appointment, and then schedule it accordingly. I will be honest with you, attending a child's graduation, we know that's a special moment, and it's a unique moment, but it doesn't rise to the level of our criteria for approving an earlier appointment.
Thank you very much. We have another question that actually asks about the interaction between immigrant and non-immigrant visas. Kahir Murdoch is asking, can I apply for a student visa while my immigrant visa application is being processed? Stephen, can you talk a little bit about how non-immigrant and immigrant visas interact or don't? And
Right. That's a good question, and the answer to that question really depends upon circumstances. However, applying for an immigrant visa in no way automatically disqualifies someone from consideration for a non-immigrant visa. The key with the non-immigrant visa is that you have to demonstrate that you intend to return to a home country, in this case Jamaica, upon completion of your travel to the United States. Now, in this case, we're talking about studies. So the applicant is going to have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the consular officer that after completing that course of study, that the applicant will return to Jamaica. Typically, we get this question from people who are applying for a tourist visa and they have a pending immigrant visa application. And there it's pretty, I think it's an easier judgment call, because someone could go to the United States for a short visit of a week or two, and then come back to their home country and proceed with the processing for their immigrant visa. The student visa, depending upon where you're studying, it could be there for 3 or 4 years, during which time the immigrant visa could play out. So it really depends on circumstances, but I do want to stress the fact that if you have an immigrant visa that is pending, it doesn't preclude your being issued a non-immigrant visa, and that's the key point.
Thank you very much. In fact, I just saw somebody this morning who is studying in the United States, and I interviewed them for an immigrant visa. So what you say is, we see it every day at the window. So, okay, we have another question from a viewer. They are asking, good afternoon, I applied for a visitor visa and was turned down recently. How soon can I reapply?
Well, the way our processing is set up here, it's an automated system that determines how you get an appointment, and it's set up in such a way that somebody that has been turned down will have to wait 6 months before they will be allowed to schedule another appointment. That does not prevent somebody from submitting an application and paying the fee, but they're not going to be able to make use of that fee in the form of an appointment for 6 months after the initial refusal.
Thank you very much. It's a very specific answer. That's great. Okay, there's a question about documents and immigrant visas. So Maurice Thompson is asking, can I use a police record that is 1.5 years old for an immigrant visa? And just to zoom out a little bit, I guess the question would be, when I come to the visa interview, how do I know which documents are current or not? And how can I best ensure that I have the puzzle pieces I need to move the visa forward?
Well, for the first part of the question, can you use a police certificate that's 1.5 years old? Veronica, as the ID expert, what's the answer to that?
The answer is yes.
That's
Currently, they are valid for 1 year plus a 1 year extension, which would mean 2 years. So as it stands today, as long as the visa is issued within 2 years of that police certificate having been issued, you are just fine on that note.
And that's a good point to mention, the fact that originally the requirement was the police certificate had to have been issued within 1 year. But as a result of the pandemic and all the disruptions in operations that it created, the department decided to extend the validity or the age of the police certificate to 2 years, just to make it easier for people so that they didn't have to go out and get a new police certificate after a year. So, so it is 2 years. With regards to knowing specifically what it is that you need to bring with you to the appointment, typically when you receive your appointment date, you will be informed of what you actually need to bring with you to the interview. We also send out another email that again reiterates the documents that are needed. But in general terms, birth certificates, police certificates, marriage certificates, divorce degrees. Obviously, if you haven't been married, you don't need a divorce decree. Affidavits of support. This is very important. You need to have an affidavit of support form that is completely filled out and signed. And in addition to that, whoever is completing that form, your petitioner, also needs to provide information with respect to their income in the form of a completed income tax form, 1040, for example, and W-2. The W-2 form are the wage statements that workers in the United States receive from their company every time they're paid. They get a wage statement, so it could be weekly or bi-weekly, depending upon the payment arrangement. And if W-2s are not available, you can also bring in the IRS tax transcript. This is a copy of the tax transcript or the taxes that was submitted to the IRS that the IRS processed in lieu of providing the W-2. And we do see a number of people who fail to provide the documents supporting their affidavit of support. So that's very important. So those are some of the documents, and naturally, you also require the panel physician report. And so again, when you schedule your appointment, it really behooves you as quickly as possible to set up your panel physician exam, because we do need the results of that examination in order to complete the processing of your ID case. So that's something else that's very important. But again, all of this will, you will get an email that will tell you, that will outline what it is that you need. And if you have any questions, feel free to write to KingstonIV@state.gov.
Exactly. So again, that email address is KingstonIV@state.gov. If you have any non-immigrant visa questions, feel free to write KingstonNIV@state.gov. Speaking of taxes, Stephen, what if the petitioner on my immigrant visa case does not earn enough money to sponsor me financially to enter as an immigrant? What can I do then?
Well, that's a very good question. There is a provision for a joint sponsor or a co-sponsor. That is another person who is willing to provide financial support to an applicant when the applicant arrives to the United States. And again, that person has to fill out an affidavit of support form and provide supporting documentation with respect to what their income level is.
Thank you. George Robinson is asking, is mandatory vaccination still a requirement for entering the USA as a Jamaican citizen?
That's a very good question. We were just talking about
Yes,
that.
we were.
How timely. So, to eliminate the confusion for people out there, regardless of whether you're an immigrant visa holder or a non-immigrant visa holder, when you travel to the United States, you do need to present evidence of having been vaccinated. So the answer there is yes, you do need to be vaccinated to travel to the United States if you are a foreign national, i.e. not a U.S. citizen. With respect to applying for a visa, there's a slight distinction. For immigrant visa applicants, we cannot issue an immigrant visa to an applicant until we see proof that they have been vaccinated. So you must establish that you've been vaccinated in order to receive an immigrant visa. On the other hand, there is no such requirement for non-immigrant visa applicants. That is to say, you do not have to be vaccinated in order to qualify for a tourist visa or any other form of non-immigrant visa. However, once you qualify for that visa and are issued that visa, if you wish to use it to travel to the United States, you must demonstrate to the United States when you travel that you have indeed been vaccinated. So the rule of thumb is it's just best to get vaccinated, then you're covered.
Definitely. Okay, Stephen, so at the top of the program, you mentioned that it's a very busy J season. You also mentioned it's a very busy H season,
Yes.
H-2A and H-2B visas in the non-immigrant world. The question from Jordan Olmo is, do petitions made by employers for work visas, I'm assuming the H visa class is what he's referring to, expire?
Yes, actually those petitions do expire. And typically the length of a petition is generally 3 years, but it's not necessarily always 3 years. So there is a limited time period. And what will happen is we will issue a visa and time the validity to that expiration date on the petition. And when the petition expires, the person can come in and apply for another visa, and that is to say, assuming they have a new petition, they've renewed the petition.
And if I can just add, sometimes also what happens is a petition has a certain amount of spots on it,
Yes.
and if any one applicant has a delay from getting a visa for whatever reason, the employer may choose to fill those spots with other applicants. So then in that case, the petition would be maxed out, and so it's best to make sure you have all that paperwork that you are able to provide and are applying in a timely fashion if you've got that kind of visa. Okay, we have another question about sort of the interplay between immigrant and non-immigrant visas. Lala Scarlett is asking, I'm currently waiting for my immigrant visa interview date. However, my visiting visa will expire soon. Can I apply for a renewal?
Yes, you can apply to renew your non-immigrant visa, and if you were 14 or over at the time the last tourist visa was issued, it's highly likely you'll qualify for immigrant waiver processing, interview waiver processing, which means that you won't actually have to schedule an in-person appointment.
And can you remind us, how do I go about finding out whether I'm qualified for interview waiver processing?
Sure, absolutely. When you pay the fee when you pay the visa fee and schedule your appointment, you will be asked a series of questions, and based upon your responses to those questions, the automated system will determine whether you qualify for interview waiver processing or not. If you do qualify for interview waiver processing, it will inform you of that fact and tell you to stay tuned, to wait for another a letter from us, email correspondence, instructing you as to when to submit your passport. If you don't qualify, it will simply schedule you for a visa appointment.
Thank you very much. All right, so Kendra Smith and Honesty Thompson are asking the same question for different types of visas. They are saying, one of them says, if I have a mistake on my immigrant visa application and the other on my non-immigrant visa application, how do I go about correcting, or at what point am I able to correct the mistake on my DS-260, the application, or 160, depending on the visa type?
Okay, well, that's a good question, and it all depends upon when you discover the mistake. If you discover the mistake prior to coming in for your interview, when you come in for the interview, you can simply inform the local staff member that it enrolls you into the system that there is a mistake on your application, and they'll make the correction right there. So typically, we see mistakes in spellings of names, in the birth dates, the passport numbers, or where the passports were issued. And so you can literally tell the local staff or local employee when you come to the embassy and you go to the first window, because there's an enrollment process that you go through before you have your interview. During that enrollment process, you can inform the staff member of that mistake, and they will make the correction right then and there. On the other hand, if you don't discover the mistake until after the visa is issued, and you look at the visa and you see, hey, my name has been misspelled, or this is not my birth date, or my gender is wrong. At that point, again, you can simply bring it to the attention of the embassy. If you as soon as you can, just let us know. You can write to Kingston ID or Kingston NIV for instructions on how to submit the passport, so that we can make the correction and get it back to you. But it is so important, if you do discover a mistake, to correct it before trying to use the visa. Because if you try to use the visa and there's a mistake on it, you run the risk that you will not be allowed entry into the United States. It's at the discretion of an immigration official of the States. And if the information on the visa does not correspond exactly to the information on the passport, at their discretion, they may not allow you in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we not frequently, but at times we do correct visas that have incorrect information printed on it, and we're happy to do so because that's important that you travel with documents that are consistent. So, all right, we are going to talk a little bit about timing and visa appointments. People are writing in about the fact that as we are working very diligently through our backlog and adding appointment capacity and availability, the crowd is getting bigger and bigger outside the U.S. Embassy. Do you have any suggestions, or can you tell us about rules when it comes to when I should show up for my visa interview?
Right. That's a very good question. Ideally, we want people to arrive about 15 minutes before their scheduled appointment time. But we understand that there are circumstances that may not permit that. There could be traffic on the roads, there could be an accident, and we know that people try to arrive sooner rather than later because they don't want to miss their appointment. And right now, the policy, because we're processing so many visa applicants, is that if you arrive 15 minutes late for your appointment, you run the risk of not being allowed in simply because we're processing so many people. But that said, it really is to your advantage. If you do arrive super early, I would say try to avoid the crowds and the mob scene. Go someplace, have a cup of coffee, have some breakfast, relax, and then make your way to the embassy at about the time of your interview appointment, because we're very concerned for people's safety. And to that degree, we've created additional waiting space so that that people have the ability or the space to wait. But that said, you want to avoid any type of mob scene that's away from the embassy, that's off embassy grounds. So I just advise people to relax and show up at the embassy just in time for your appointment.
Thank you very much. We are slowly going to wrap up. There's so many questions. There's
that's good. The more
which
questions,
is
the better.
great. Yes, thanks for participating, everyone. It's wonderful to see them all. But before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
Well, I wish everybody the best of luck in their visa applications. Again, for immigrant visa applicants, and this is my big concern, is I would advise them, please do everything you can to make sure you're prepared for the day of interview. Because we have a lot of people that come in, they've been waiting a year and a half for an appointment. They finally get that appointment. And then they come in and they're missing the police certificate, or they're missing an affidavit of support or a tax transcript. And then, it's not the end of the world, but it simply means we can't process the case that day. It means we have to wait for them to provide us that information. And sometimes people have lives to lead. They have other things to do with their time. They get busy, they put it off, and now we're waiting days, weeks, even months to get the document. And it's the only thing that's holding up the issuance of the visa. So that's why I strongly urge people on the immigrant visa front, please make sure you're prepared. Have your documents with you. And if you have questions about what you should have with you, please write to Kingston ID at State Government.
Yes, and I can also assure you, as a consular officer, there is nothing more satisfying in my job than issuing a visa when all the documents are there and the interview has gone well. So it's a good experience for everybody, including the adjudicating officer, when you can hit that print button on our computer.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Stephen.
Well, thank you for having me.
Good luck to everybody. Thank you for joining us out there, and we'll see you next month for another edition of Consular Conversations Live.